In this video, we're going to look at operations on signed fractions. Perform the indicated operations on the fractions and/or mixed numbers using your knowledge of signed numbers. So let's take a glance at these problems. Here we have a positive fraction minus a positive fraction. Okay. So this is in operations on signed fractions. You may wonder how this is different, but we'll see in a few moments that we're actually going to get a negative result. Here we have a negative fraction plus a positive fraction, and here we have a negative mixed number minus a positive mixed number. Okay? So basically for these problems, we're going to use the same general strategies that we used for adding and subtracting positive mixed numbers and fractions. Okay? And then occasionally we're going to have some issues come up that involve signed numbers, and we're going to use some of the ideas that we learned about integers and apply them to these situations. So let's start on the first one. So you don't even need to recognize right away that this result is going to be negative. Just work on this problem as you would any other subtraction of fraction problem. So notice the denominators are 7 and 3. So our least common denominator is the product of the two numbers divided by the greatest common factor, and since 3 and 7 only have a common factor of 1, that's their GCF, and we want to rewrite them both with a common denominator of 21. So let's do that. So 3/7, we want to rewrite this as some number over 21. So to get from 7 to 21 through multiplication, I would multiply by 3. So I'm going to multiply the numerator and denominator by 3, which gives me that 3/7 is equivalent to 9 over 21. Now we'll do this with 2/3. Okay. I'd multiply 3 by 7 to get 21. So I'll multiply the numerator and denominator by 7, and we have 14 over 21. So now using our equivalent fractions, we'll rewrite this expression. 9 over 21 minus 14 over 21. Okay. So when we are subtracting two fractions, we keep the denominator and we subtract the numerators, so 9 minus 14, and we subtract them from left to right. So now here you may see is where this negative result is going to come up. 9 minus 14, since 14 is larger than 9, this result is going to be negative. So 9 minus 14 is negative 5 over 21. And typically we consider our most simple answer is going to be rewriting this. Instead of a negative 5 in the numerator, we write the negative sign out front, kind of write it in the middle so we can tell it's not directly applied to the numerator, and the fraction. So you can think of this when we divided, a negative divided by a positive is negative. So instead of thinking of this as a negative 5 over 21, we're going to think of this as negative 5/21. Okay? So when in your final answers, you should put the negative outside. Okay? Now let's look at the next one. We have negative 2/5 plus 7/5. Okay? So notice in this example, we already have a common denominator. That's great news because that's usually a lot of the work like we saw here. But what will we do about this negative 2/5? Well, we're going to use the same idea we used here, but in reverse. So instead of negative 2/5, we're going to write it as negative 2 over 5. So we have negative 2 over 5 plus 7 over 5. Okay. So now the denominators are the same. We can add the numerators. Negative 2 plus 7 is 5. And we have 5 over 5. We keep the numerator or denominator. And 5 over 5 equals 1. Okay. So just to review, when we're adding or subtracting fractions and one of them is negative, just rewrite the negative sign that's outside as the sign of the number in the numerator. And then you can use these signed integers to combine your numerators, and that will take care of the original negative number. Okay. One more. Here we have negative 2 2/5 minus 4 3/5. Okay. So our general strategy for these, and there's again lots of ways we can do this, but we would write these as improper fractions, and then we'd use the same process that we used in these problems to add or subtract. So first, note that when we say negative 2 2/5, the negative applies to the entire mixed number 2 2/5. Okay? So we need to start by writing this as an improper fraction, and we would do that, so we'll keep the negative sign out front. We keep the denominator, then we have 5 times 2 plus 2. So we have negative, this would be 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12/5. Okay. Now, notice it's sort of up front, okay, but I'm going to make sure when I write this here, I'm going to make the 12 negative. So I'm going to write this as negative 12 over 5. Okay. So that way I can include that signed numerator in my operations. Similarly, now we're going to subtract 4 3/5. 4 3/5. We have 5 as the denominator, then 5 times 4 plus 3, which is 23/5. So we have negative 12/5 minus 23/5. So now, remember this is a subtraction problem, so we keep the denominator. Here's our first number, negative 12, subtract, or minus 23. So we have a negative number minus a positive number. Okay. So negative 12 minus 23 is negative 35 over 5. And now we can simplify this. Okay, so we could write this as opposed to negative 35 over 5, that's equivalent to negative 35/5. And 35 divided by 5 is the whole number 7, so we have negative 7, the integer, as our result.